Hi everybody and welcome along to another week's edition of Watercolour Wednesday. It's great to be here live with you this week. Someone's moved my stool. Never mind. Yeah, I've lost my stool. How can that be? That's not good. Okay, so we are doing our stag in the snow today, which looks really complicated, but I'm going to break it down into small steps for you. We're going to use a limited colour range, mainly phthalo blue, burnt sienna and Friends grey, which I've got squeezed out. Now I asked you to bring some different tools today. So we have masking fluid. Oops, I've not even opened this one. So we're going to be using masking fluid. Now I've just launched my own masking fluid that I've formulated, which is now available on my website. Comes in these little 20ml bottles. I've got my masking fluid. I have my salt. Hi Richard. Hello. I have my salt. This is Himalayan salt, but you can use any salt you like. And today we're also going to be using titanium white gouache. Or you could use white acrylic paint, and it's optional, it's up to you. It's not something that I use often, but again I have launched my own brand. This is extremely white, very opaque white gouache, now available on the website. We're going to be using my size 12 brush, size 6 and also a size 1 rigger for the fine details. Oh, 5 of you today. Excellent. I am just going to grab my stool, so bear with me a second, because I've got nowhere to rest my feet and I don't like my legs dangling. It's what you get used to, isn't it? So, we're going to start by mixing and painting in our background. And this is going to be done really loosely using wet and wet techniques. I'm just going to make myself disappear off the screen so you can see everything on my table. Excuse me. You're Jay using your husband. I did wonder who Richard was, I must admit. I did wonder. I have got some gentlemen subscribers, but yeah, nice to see you. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to put some masking fluid on to some of the white areas of the paper to protect them. Now again, this is optional. There are ways to create this painting without it. So I'm going to focus on these blades of grass at the mid area where the horizon is, and just flick some using a thin brush, an old one, and we're going to create some of these spikes of grass. The downside of using a thin brush is you need to keep reloading it. Now the masking fluid that I've created is a very pale blue, so you can see where you've put it. There's some of them, I think the Winsor and Newton one is like a buff colour, which can be harder to see. So this has been tinted with cerulean blue if you're interested in the detail. So just gently stroking away, creating these frosty blades of grass, particularly focusing where it's backing on to some dark areas. Let's have some tall wispy ones. And lift that brush as you move away. You could use a rubber-ended tool for this, or a little twig if you don't want to mess up your brushes. I keep this brush for applying masking fluid, so it's kind of one that I keep for that purpose. Now there is a bit of grass that's coming across our stag, so I'm going to do that because that's a tricky one to do even with the gouache. So I'm going to bring that across our stag. And a few more blades of grass at the bottom here. Now with masking fluid, we have to let it dry before we can paint. So grab your hairdryer, ready to dry it off if you're painting live. It's something that I'd say, now you could also take this into the trees and bring some of these frosty branches, but I'm going to leave that so I can show you other mediums. Hi Catherine. Oh, I'm glad you're feeling better. It's rough, isn't it? I had a terrible stomach bug last week and I was hoping I would still be able to make it live, but just decided best not to because I wasn't in a good place. So just going to wipe these splashes of masking fluid off. So whilst we let that dry, let's mix up some colours and get our background colours ready. And then we might not need the hairdryer. So I'm just going to move that out of the way so I don't splatter the page, and get a spare piece of paper. So we've got these lovely cool bluey greys that we're going to be using. Oh, the other thing to mention, I've got 3 cups of water today. And the reason I've got 3 cups is when I use the white, I do not want to infect the other colours with any white in them, otherwise it will change them from watercolour transparency and they'll get a bit opaque, which we don't want. So I'm having a 1/3 cup of water. Okay, so I'm going to start with some grey. And I want this to be looking cold and frosty, so I'm going to add some phthalo blue to that. And we want it really watery. So I want you to make a big puddle. If you haven't got the grey, you'll use phthalo blue, a bit of magenta to turn it purple, and then add your yellow. And that will turn it grey. So I'm just going to mix up a big puddle of this because I don't want to be running out. The other way you could do it is to take your blue and put burnt sienna in, but you will also need a little bit of red if you're using my burnt sienna. As it will go slightly greeny. There we go. So a nice puddle, and let's just try this down. Maybe a touch more blue in there. There we go. Gives us that nice cool background. I think that's good. Okay, let's bring our stag back, and I'm just going to blast this with the hairdryer for a second, just to make sure it's completely dry before we add our water and our paint. Okay, let me just get myself organised. So, we're going to start with this lovely colour, and we're going to come in at the bottom for a change, behind the grass. Coming along the bottom, wet on to dry. And we're taking this around the edge of our stag, carefully. a little bit under his belly and round the other side. Now I'm going to take this a bit further up, so add in a bit more paint up the left hand side and spreading this up, because this is quite a dark area on the left, and a little bit more on the right. Coming up the edge, have your paint nice and weak. And now I'm just going to take my water and come into that with just water. Remember to tap your brush on your tissue before you approach the paper to avoid any back runs. And basically, I'm touching in to this blue so that it's got somewhere to bleed out and fade. Just water, spreading that around. And the colour down here will bleed up. If you want to, tip your board up as you do it. I'm going to add a little bit more colour here into the water. Take it a bit higher on the left. I'm holding my board up with my hand, so it's flowing that way. And then this middle bit, I'm just adding water. You can go over his horns, that's fine, but you want to avoid his head and his body. And then now that's got water on it, I'm going to add a little touch, a hint more of this blue mixture right along that middle section. So it really is a hint of colour there, nothing too strong. Just dropping a bit more of that colour at the sides. Spreading it over, coming around the back of our stag again. Wonderful. Okay, now we're going to mix up some more grey into our blue. Once you're happy with that, take your grey into that blue. Took quite a big slug there. And I'm also going to get ready some burnt sienna. And I'm just going to drop in some dots of burnt sienna. Using the tip of my brush, the paint's quite watery, so it's going to bleed together. Tiny little dots, and just let it spread out on its own. I'm going to come down to that grass. We want it nice and dark down there. And then the same with that grey. Just dropping in randomly. Nice and wet. Your brush is wet, your paint is wet, the paper's still wet. And we're doing this wet in wet, so everything softens out. Let's take a bit of that grey down the bottom on the other side, under his belly, and a touch in that middle section. And just allow it to bleed up, let it do its thing. Again, if you want to, you can hold your board up and encourage it to flow the other way. Nice and dark down the bottom. I'm going to add a little bit more grey down the bottom, being conscious of the fact that the paint will get lighter as it dries. Now, if you haven't got masking fluid, the thing you should do, I'll do a bit over here, is take your dark colour and on the tip of the brush, just come into the white and leave some spiky bits for the grass, okay? So if you're not using masking fluid, just drag some of that colour down from that edge. Okay, now before this dries, this patch here, just want to put a little bit more grey in. So I'm going really strong this time with my grey, but again, still just dotting in because it's nice and wet, it's going to flow. A little bit darker there. And a touch more of that burnt sienna, creamy again with a wet brush. A few more dots of burnt sienna as we come up the side. Basically what we're doing is creating some shrubs in the background. So you want that kind of pattern forming, and a bit more grey up here as well. And as your page dries out, these dots are going to move less and less. Okay, now then, one bit more grey I think over here. So over this side where we've done that patch of dark colour, this is where we're going to put our salt. So grab a pinch of salt and sprinkle it over the foliage, just on the left hand side. And let it absorb the paint that we've put down. Just a little pinch. Now we are going to move fairly quickly with this because it's a game where we need that shine on the paper, okay? So I'm going to take this grey colour that we used just now, water it down a bit more, and with my rigger brush, I'm going to bring some twigs and trees into the background, and I want these to slightly fade and blend into the background. So nice fine. If you haven't got a rigger brush, just use the tip of the smallest brush that you have. Nice and loose. Hold that brush way back down the stem, which will allow you to keep nice and loose. And these should just be soft. We want them to soften the marks into the water. Now I'll show you something you can do if your paper has dried. Use the reference picture as a guide to where you want to put the twigs coming up behind our stag. Now, if some of these look dark, because these are background trees, just touch them with your tissue to soften them back, okay? Because we want them to be in the distance, almost disappearing into that snow blizzard. And then the same the other side. Nice and watery with your grey. And notice how these trees and twigs are all kind of curling up and away. I keep adding water to my brush to keep these really light. Don't worry if you go over your salt, that's fine. A few shorter ones at the bottom here, next to our stag. A wet wipe's really handy as well. If you use a wet, a hand wipe, to dab your colour if it's too strong. That helps as well. That bit's a bit strong, so I'm just going to dab that back. Now, if your branches are disappearing altogether, don't worry. We're going to add more in a little while, and it's just going to give you those hazy backgrounds. I'm going to take our time and add quite a few of these. Right, I'm going to bring some through the salt. A little bit stronger now, a little bit darker. I just want them to come into the salt, and we'll add some more later again. Be careful not to dislodge too much of the salt. Lovely, that's looking good. A few even lighter ones. Going even lighter with my mixture. Really pow over this corner. So we get that hazy look in that mid-ground. Really light. Let's have a few more coming up that middle section. Fabulous. And can you see how some of them have stayed where I put them and others have disappeared? What you can also do is soften them back. So here they look a bit harsh. So I'm just coming in with a damp brush over the top. Just a little bit of water to soften them back. Touch with the tissue. Fabulous. So this really isn't a hard one to do. It's just knowing the techniques. I'm just going to pause there and allow some of this to dry before we take our next steps. Just to let you know, I am expecting a delivery today that should have come yesterday. It's still not here, so if I get a ding dong on the door, I'll just have to shoot off for a minute. And next week on Tuesday, I will be appearing at 3 o'clock on Create and Craft for a watercolour show. I'm still not sure what I'm painting yet. I might go for another snow scene. Usually I do animals on there, but I'm thinking of doing a landscape, but we will see. So 3 o'clock on channel 673 on Sky. I'm not sure what it is on the other stations, but you can check on the website. Set your record button if you're not going to be home, and see what I get up to. I'm loving this, looking so icy. I'm just going to go and pick up a wet wipe. I think I have in the corner of the room here. Yes. So if some of your twigs are still looking too dark, just take a wet wipe and just gently rub over the top, and you can pick up some of that paint and soften them into the background, because at this stage we want them soft. Okay, now we're going to put some more twigs, still using the same brush, our rigger brush or our fine liner brush. I'm going to take my grey a bit darker, a bit creamier, a bit stronger, because these twigs are coming towards us now. So we're going to add another layer really finely. You want to come in on the tip of that brush and just stroke. I'm going to come behind the stag, break them off, have some that are connected. So these ones will appear in our painting that they're closer to us because they're darker than the last ones, and because the background's dry or drier, they're going to hold their shape for longer. So we've got a bit of a bush coming in this side. So I'm going to add a few more stronger branches, stronger as in colour. And you see how those come closer to us and the previous ones disappear. The paper's still quite wet there. And add some on the left as well. I'm going to gently dry this area off because I don't want these to blur, and they are still blurring. So I'm just going to dab that one out and that one. And I'm going to dry this off, but I want to try not to move the salt when you dry it off. Here goes. That should be better. Fingers crossed. Let me just hang my hairdryer up. Here we go. So back to my darker grey. Bit creamier, remember, for our next layer of twigs. I'm going to put that one back in that blurred on me. I'm pulling some of them into the bushes here. So I'm starting back here and dragging them back into the salt. So these ones, as I say, will appear to the viewer closer to us. The ones in the background that may have looked quite strong before now fade back. Bringing some amongst the salt. I'll add a few more once that's fully dried. Really fine. Keep using that brush. It will hold on to a fair amount of paint to create your twigs. And you can also use the fine brush to come between these blades of grass again, particularly if you haven't used masking fluid. Just making some other twig lines coming off. We'll deal with that area once that's dried a bit more. And a few shorter ones coming in from the edge of my masking tape. Crisscross them so it looks nice and natural. I'm very happy with how that's going, how that's looking. Just clean your masking tape if it's got a bit messy down the side, if you've masked off your area. And then we're going to come down to the ground for a little while and leave that to dry on its own. So I'm going to use this grey-blue mixture again, but I'm going to add a little bit more blue back into it. of a turquoisey colour. And I'm just deciding whether to do this wet on to dry or to wet it first. I think I'm going to wet it first. So we're going to wet the foreground area with water, obviously. You can go over the stag's feet because they're going to be nice and dark, so don't worry about that. And just come in to those blades of grass at the bottom. So it's nice and damp, not soaking wet. And then I'm going to come in, drop a little bit of this colour. It's still very diluted down the bottom of the page. So I'm just tapping it on along the bottom edge of my tape, of my paper. And then there's some clumps of grass. So I'm looking for the shadow at the base of the grass here. And I'm going to drop some of this colour here. Just taking the end of my brush, dropping some colour in along by our stag's feet. Little clumps where we've got a bit of colour going on. A little bit more at the bottom of the page again. And that's going to spread out into the water. And we're going to take our brush into those clumps of paint and flick. I've not got any paint on my brush, I'm just using what's on the paper and flicking to create more grass peeking through the snow. Clean your brush off every now and again because it's going to pick up a lot of colour. And just flicking up on the very tip of the brush. I'm not pushing down at all. I'm using it on its point and just flicking up. I like that effect. And in the front here, some grass close to us. I'm making it a little bit longer. If you need to, add a little touch of colour to your brush. And just like with the background, these are going to fade away and blend a little bit. I'm going to have a few more bits of grass here. But what I do want you to do is go into these clumps that we put down first with a clean, dry brush and just swipe to flatten the bottom of that little puddle of colour. So I'm just pulling to the side, pulling to the left to create a shadow. So just going into that colour and pulling across to the left, pulling across to the left. Create some shadows in the snow. So we're not adding any more colour. We don't want too much colour here. I'm just coming into the bottom. If you want to, pick up a bit more colour, put it on and swipe to the side. We've got a lovely clean area of snow in the middle. Couple of little sprigs there maybe. And then swipe off to the left. We're imagining, we know from our stag that the sun is coming this way because his head is highlighted on the right and his haunch is highlighted. So we're taking our shadows that way. Just flicking up into that grass again a little bit more. It's making me chilly painting this. So convincing. Okay, we need to let that dry now as well. Oh my goodness. So whilst that's drying, please check that around your stag that everything's dry because we're going to paint him next. And we don't want him bleeding into our background, do we? I'm going to use my size 6 brush to paint him. I'm just going to give you a little moment longer to sort out your foregrounds. Remember, put those clumps of paint down and then flick through to get that upward movement of some grass coming through the snow. But we don't want to lose all that white. I'll just give you a bit longer on that before we paint our stag. I've just changed my mind, guys. We're going to go back to the top for a second and we're going to add some wintry leaves to our foliage here. So I'm going to take burnt sienna. I love changing my mind, keeps you all on your toes. Burnt sienna, quite creamy now, like single cream consistency, quite strong. I'm going to add a little bit of grey into that to darken it to more of a burnt umber. Lovely deep dark chocolate colour. And then with the tip of my brush, I'm just going to bounce around in the trees up here, not pushing down too far because I want the marks small. Pick a branch. If it's bleeding, stop and wait for your paper to dry. Some small ones, so I'm just using the tip of the brush. Use your size 6 brush if you wish. Nice and creamy with that paint, and come in the other side. I'm literally not thinking about leaves. I'm just making marks with the tip of the brush, and it is a little tap and lift, tap and lift. Take some along this branch. Nice. And again, this is coming towards us now. We're creating a sense of depth in our painting. A little bit of this colour down that corner. Now, that's still damp. I'm going to try. So I'm just going to dot and see what happens. Oh goodness, the heavens have just opened up outside. I can hear it on my window. Just some little leaves dotted around. Tiny little dots in places and slightly bigger where it's more bushy still. And I think what I'm going to do next is splatter, because there's lots of tiny leaves. So I'm going to protect this area of my paper. I'm going to take my brush, load it with that chocolate brown and splatter. It's a lot quicker way. Nice and creamy. The creamier your paint for the splatter, the less it's going to spread if it is still damp. And we've also got less chance of dislodging. Oops. I've got it all over my snow. Just wipe that off with a wet wipe. And then remove that. And we've got some splatters. Just a few more, I think, up here in this middle section. Really tap that brush hard. And wipe your snow. Okay, now this is good because we've already mixed up the colour that we want for our stag as well, for the dark. So I'm going to go burnt sienna and grey again. Make a lovely dark brown. Clean my brush off. And then some burnt sienna on its own for the lighter areas of the stag. Okay, size 6 brush for this. I'll just give you another moment longer on your leaves and then we'll paint him in. I'm going to zoom that camera in a little bit closer. Okay, so burnt sienna, quite light. We're going to come across his haunch, wet onto dry. And bring this colour down his belly and behind his neck. And then a little bit on the side of his face, just under his eye, both sides. Going to come under his nose. Quite light there, so I'm just going to tap that with my tissue to lighten him up a little bit. And then into our chocolate brown. Coming around his back end. Now you can see a little bit of his tail. We're going to indicate that in a moment. And just let that chocolate brown touch into the burnt sienna. Come under his belly, nice and strong. We're not painting any detail on him. And then we've got a leg coming across at the back. Comes across. And then down into the snow. Come down that back leg line. Down to the snow. And then when you get down to the bottom where the snow is, I just want you to pull some of that dark colour down into the snow. And then we can fill in the rest. Lovely. And then I'm going to come down his legs. I've lost a leg. I've lost a leg in the snow. Interesting, Eunice. Let me see where that leg was. So, oh no. I'm going to bring that one down. It comes down and then back a little way to the kneecap. One leg. How did I manage that? And then this one, there is a little gap between the leg as it comes into the snow. Together at the top. And then leave a gap. Does that look right? Kind of looks right. Just going to lift a bit of that off. Okay. And then in the snow, I'm leaving a little gap because you can see the leg through the snow and just putting a little indication of his nice long legs. Tap that with my tissue to lighten it. Lovely chocolatey brown. Okay, and now we can come up his neck. Now I've found his leg that I've chopped off. I'm going to come up his neck. He's almost silhouetted, but not quite. Bit more burnt sienna there to merge that area together. There we go. I'm really not happy about his legs. I might have to sort them out afterwards. Okay, I'm just going to lift a little bit of a highlight on his chest across that back leg, because the first leg you can see is his back leg. So I'm just lifting a bit of paint there, and then I'm going to put his leg back in, the one that's close to us. That makes more sense to me. See what I've done now? I've created a highlight on his chest to separate the legs. This is fiddly, okay, coming up under his chin and to the right hand side of his nose, and soften the edges as you go up towards the face. I'm adding a bit more grey to my brown to darken it more, and come back in with that lovely dark chest. Just soften that edge with a little bit of water so it flows away. There we go. Nice. And then into his head. Being really careful, we're going to come up the top of his head to that V shape in the middle and come down between his eyes. Widens, kind of like a rhombus shape. So I'm just painting that strange shape there between his ears. And then just using a little bit of water to pull that down towards the nose. Into the ears. On the tip of your brush, take your time. I'm focusing on that little bit of white, that little highlight above his eye. Going a bit darker around the edge of the ears. It's very fiddly. And then into his nose. Coming across the middle and up both sides, very tiny. And then a little bit of a mouth at the bottom, leaving a tiny bit of white around the edge. Don't worry too much. We can see he's a stag. Don't need to go into too much detail. There we go. Lovely. And we need to pop the eyes in afterwards. So let's leave his face alone for a little while. And we're going to come into his antlers. I'm going to use this really chocolate brown again, but adding a bit more grey this time so it's virgin on black. And we're going to come into those antlers. Comes from the middle of the head on the point of your brush, coming across and up, or you can come down if you find it easier. Come from the top down. the other side. I've made a little bit of a mess up there, but that's okay. I'm just going to lift that off with my wet wipe and I'm going to go again. I pushed down on my brush too much instead of staying on the tip. Happens to us all. There we go. And lastly, with our stag, we're going to pop his eyes in. You could use a fine liner pen if you want to. They're under the ears, just to the side. Lovely. Just going to darken the tip of this antler. And you want them to be even, so I'm going to lengthen this one. There we go. One last bit here. Just because of the angle we're seeing him, can you see, you can see a split in the horn here. Here you can't see it so much, but it's there, just there. Okay, I'm just going to sort out my stag's legs because I need a bit more of a gap between. So I'm just going to lift out a bit of colour with a dry, damp brush between his legs there and some tissue. Just sorting out that shape of the leg that's going off to the side, down and across, down and across. Does that look okay? And lastly, we can just see his towel indicated by that shadow underneath. So just on the end of my brush, a little bit there at the end for his towel. Phew, that was hard work. Just tidying him up. And a bit more of a shadow under his chin, so his face pops forward a bit more. Well, you all need to sit down after that, I should imagine. Just darkening his back a little bit more with some more burnt sienna, and then I promise I'll stop fiddling. A little dark spot at the top. Wonderful. Last thing I'm going to do to my stag is I want that roundness of his belly to stand out just behind his bottom. So I'm just going to lift out, highlight a little half circle on the side of his belly. You see that? Okay. I'm going to thoroughly dry this now, and then we can finish the bushes and finish the grass area because there's just another layer to do down here. So let's dry that off thoroughly. And then we can remove our salt. So I find it easy to take a soft brush initially and dust that salt off, and you should have a lovely mottled pattern underneath. And then use my finger to make sure I've got it all off. And we're also going to remove the masking paper. Oh, thank you, Rosemary. It's coming on okay, isn't it? So, tip of the finger. I'm just going to rub that masking fluid off, if you've used it. And then a nice soft brush again to dust off all the debris. Now this is important now because that grass is really standing out, but it's standing out too much for me. So I'm going to go back to my rigger brush, wherever it's gone, and just add a bit more of that blue that we've still got over here, coming up and adding a few more grass strands. So with that blue colour that we used in the background, coming into that clump of grass for a few more defined grass areas, and then stroking up into the white left behind from the masking fluid. I'm going to do that all along that edge. Quite a clump of grass, so I'm going to add quite a few strands here. And coming back to our stag's feet, I'm going to add some more grass there too. I think there's a little bush or something that he's standing behind here. There's a little bit of masking fluid left. Just a few dark spots amongst the snow. Shrinking some of the size of that grass down as well. So coming into the background and bringing some colour back over the grass, just to shrink it down a little bit. And then a few darker spots at the base. A few little dark spots, just using the end of my rigger brush. And a couple more grasses at the bottom, coming right at us from the bottom of the scene. Just a few wisps of grass. That's close to us, so it's bigger. Take your time here, adjusting some of those blades of grass down. Fabulous. Okay, we're nearly there, guys. Dark brown again, rigger brush again, and we're going to add those branches in the tree. Nice and fine. Just tapering them off, lifting my brush as I go across the page. And a few coming up between the grass. You see I'm coming in between those blades of grass, stroking a few twigs coming up. We couldn't do this before because we had our salt sat there. Crisscrossing, so it's just not one area of straight lines. You want some twigs to come off the other ones. Lovely. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do over here where I did the blades of grass with the masking fluid is just bring a hint of colour into those as well. Just a hint. Just narrowing that grass down that's crossing my stag with a bit of stag colour. There we go. Fabulous. So, you could call this done, or you can add some white for some snow on his antlers and on some of the branches. So this is where you don't want to mess up the white with your colour if you're still going to be doing some painting. So I'm just going to clean my palette out. Taking my size 6 brush and some creamy white. You just want it, the thicker you use gouache, the more it's going to show up. So just making sure the tip of the brush is nicely coated. And then I'm going to come behind his onto his antlers. A little bit of snow. Now, I've messed up slightly there. I've lost a bit of the antler, but that's okay. I can come back in with my dark and put that back in. Okay, and then back to my white again. I'm going to add some snow to some of these branches and just have some really icy branches. Too much paint on my brush, so I just dabbed it off. Use your rigger brush if you want to. And I'm going to come in the other side. I'm going to switch to my rigger brush for some fine white branches. Very fine. Load that brush up with paint. Very fine twigs that are frosty. You do need to use it fairly thick, just enough water so it glides off the brush. You can add some more grasses down the bottom as well if you want to. Nice fine ones. Now up the top of this bush here, there's quite a lot of white going on that band. So what I'm going to do is load up my brush with creamy white and we're going to splatter. Okay? Splatter in that bush area, maybe a bit the other side too. If you want it to still be snowing, you could splatter everywhere and even splatter over the stag. What do you think? I'm going to do that. I'm going to have it snowing. It's so much fun. A few more and then we're done. So hopefully you've not found this as hard as you first might have thought. Just lift off if there's any too many. And then of course we have that joyous moment of removing the tape. If you've taped down a border, revealing our sharp edges. And there we have our stag in the snow. Wouldn't this make a lovely Christmas card? Really would. Now please remember to post your finished paintings on our Facebook group. It's been a bit quiet the last couple of weeks, so let's get some paintings going of our stag in the snow. I hope you've enjoyed painting along with me as much as I have showing you. And don't forget to tune in on Tuesday. I will be putting a request out for some of you to send paintings into the show, because it's always encouraging for new people considering joining, seeing what you've produced rather than what I can produce. So thank you so much for joining me today, those that have been live. And for the rest of you, I hope you're having a wonderful week. Stay dry, stay warm, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Take care, everybody. Bye now. Bye.